Good morning. Morning. With me here on the stage, I'd like to welcome Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. We'll be talking a bit about the power mix. So, thank you very much for joining us this morning. So we've heard that there's some optimism from Secretary Kerry about that we'll actually have an agreement. Assuming that's the case, do we have the right mechanisms in place to hold nations accountable? Do we have the right transparency to know what people are actually doing?
So, good morning to everybody. You are right. We are in the middle of a historical process in Paris. In a few days of time, we may well see that the future of energy world and that of climate change may well be reshaped or reformulated. This will depend on whether or not we will have a good outcome from Paris in this COP meeting, and we have been there, and many of us have been there since almost 10 days, and the expectations are on the positive side. Now, one very important base for having a rather optimistic expectation is more than 180 countries in the world made pledges. They said, in the year 2030, I am going to reduce my emissions this much. And this is extremely important. This is happening for the first time in the history. There was Kyoto, which was a much smaller version with a limited number of countries. Now, almost all the countries in the world are making pledges. And important thing is, almost all these pledges, it means how much they are going to reduce their emissions, are based on energy policies. What are they doing with the renewable energies? What are they doing with the efficiency? So, therefore, we will see that the Paris will hopefully come with a good result. And in that context, we will hopefully see that countries are going to implement what they said they would be doing. But we, as the International Energy Agency, we are going to look country by country every year, compare their pledges vis-à-vis what they are really doing, and make the results available to the entire world.
So you will be trying to let us all know how everybody's doing.
Exactly. We will look at from the energy sector, what is happening in the energy sector, and whether or not what they say and what they do is exactly the same thing or not, what are the deviations that for each country, from US to China, from China to India and the other countries.
Okay. So the agreement submitted in advance of the talks would get us to about 2.7 degrees Celsius increase. So one, how much of a problem is that, right? Is 0.7 degrees really such a big deal?
Scientists worldwide told us, if we want to have a world more or less like this one now, we have to keep the temperature increase to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius, maximum. And the difference between 2 degrees and 2.7 degrees is not something that we just take our jackets off and adapt to that. It's a huge problem. It will have catastrophic implications for all of us. But 2.7 is still better than before these pledges were made, because we were in a trajectory which is higher than 3 degrees Celsius. So, and 2.7 also, we shouldn't take it for granted, because they are voluntary based, they're intended. So what I expect from Paris is, hopefully, these intentions will be transformed to real commitments, and these pledges are cemented in Paris, and hopefully energy is at the heart of the agreement in Paris, because energy sector is responsible more than 2/3 of the emissions causing climate change. Without solving the problem of the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to solve our climate problem.
So where are the gaps? What are the gaps that need to be filled in some of these plans? I mean, are there specific countries, specific technologies that we need to pursue to get us closer to 2? And is getting to 1.5, as many countries are asking, is that even feasible?
Exactly. So with the 2.7, and most of those pledges are met until 2030, 15 years. 15 years in the energy business is a very short period of time, and they are mainly based on those pledges on the basis of the existing technologies. So what we have to do is, in parallel to that, we have to increase our innovation, accelerate the innovation to get new technologies on board. The innovation is the key word here. Therefore, it is again extremely important that from Paris, we also get a long-term emission reduction goal, 2050. There should be a vision given to the investors that you investor, if you invest in the high carbon technologies, you may well lose money because this is the agreement 2050 of the entire world, so be careful. Or the other way, you give the investor the signal that I see that you are investing in the clean energy technologies, you may well make good money out of that. But this signal needs to be given to the energy investors, otherwise if we continue with the current trend, we are looking in the infrastructure in a rather unsustainable future.
So obviously renewables need to play a big role going forward. But one of the things that seems to be stopping or hindering their progress is low oil prices. How long do you think oil prices will stay low? And if they do stay this low, is there a path forward for these other technologies?
Now, we have seen yesterday oil prices below $40 since a very, very long time. And it worries me for two reasons. In fact, normally, we are looking after the interests of the consumers. And with a very linear logic, the lower the prices are, the better it is for the consumers. But it is not necessarily so if you think a bit in the broader context. My two worries are, first, we are seeing a nice transition of the energy system through renewables. For example, last year, 50% of all new power plants built in the world were renewables. Other 50%, all the other technologies put together. It means coal plus oil plus gas plus nuclear 50%, renewables 50%. And of course, renewables are growing so strongly because of their costs are coming down and the governments are supporting it. It's very important. I am afraid with the lower oil prices, this support may be weakened in some countries. This is my first worry, and some governments may be rather relaxed. The second worry I have is that when the prices are low, many observers, governments think that in the oil markets, everything is okay, we don't need to worry. It is a grave mistake, a strategic mistake. If we link our attention to oil security, and if we index it to the changes in the oil prices, we are making a big mistake, because despite the growth of oil production in the United States, US is still an oil importing country today. And the entire world, Asia, Latin America, and the others, will need the oil from Middle East to meet the oil demand growth. And with a low price environment, we will see a lot of oil production will be cut from high cost areas, such as North America, Brazil, Africa. Therefore, the diversification in the oil production will be less and less, and the world's reliance on a few countries in the Middle East will increase substantially. Therefore, oil security will be more of a problem in a low oil price environment. And when we look at the Middle East today, we just heard and we all know what is happening in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen. The problems in the Middle East may not be solved tomorrow. Some of them are structural problems, and the oil and geopolitics may be much more interwoven in a low oil price environment.
And so how long do you think that's going to last?
At least next year, we have a lot of oil, because in addition to the current glut of oil, it may well be the case that if the Iran solves all its problems with the international community, if the sanctions are lifted, we may well see Iranian oil to come to the markets, and it may well be an additional factor to have more oil, and the demand is also weaker. So therefore, 16 still downward pressure on the prices.
Okay. So in your forecasts, you've revised projections for China, both for its overall energy demand and its use of coal. So has coal use in China peaked at this point? And what's behind your revisions from last year's projections?
Now, in my view, China doesn't get the credit it deserves what they are doing in the energy context. So China made a very important development, was responsible for a very important achievement, which many of us didn't see. Namely, we have seen a happy divorce in China. Mm-hmm. The happy divorce is the following. Years and years, Chinese economic growth and energy demand went parallel to each other, very close relationship. But in the last few years, we are seeing that they are diverging. Even though the economic growth still 6-7%, energy demand grows much slower, mm-hmm. because of the China is now using energy much more efficiently than it did a few years ago. This is number one, efficiency button. China pushed much more stronger than any other country. Second, renewables. Mm-hmm. When we talk about renewables, it is the Europe comes to our mind the first. It is completely wrong. Last year, the renewable investments in China were larger than all the renewables investment in the United States, plus all European countries, plus Japan put together. Mm-hmm. China is today the number one producer of hydropower, number one producer of wind power, and this year they will be number one producer of solar power. And on top of that, as you mentioned, China is now pushing down the coal use, mm-hmm. mainly for local pollution reasons, city pollution reasons, but it doesn't matter. It also helps the reduction of the CO2 emissions which is very important for climate change. So China has a lot of still way to go, but making very important achievements.
Okay. And what about India? You obviously, in the forecast, see Indian energy demand as being a huge driver going forward. What do you see is likely to happen there in terms of their energy mix? What kinds of technologies do you think they'll be pursuing?
So India is moving to the center stage of world energy affairs. Mm-hmm. This is the most important issue. And we just talked about China. One of the most prominent energy stories is coming to an end. Namely, China is driving the global energy demand growth. China is slowing down, and India is coming very strongly. There are at least 3 reasons behind that. One, Indian population is growing very strongly. Second, Indian economy is growing very, very strongly. And third, today, 250 million people in India, they have no electricity. A big gap there. So Indian government therefore pushes the button on 2 different fronts. On one hand, they are going to use, and they are using a lot of coal, which is the cheapest source of generating electricity in India today. And second, at the same time, however, they have a major program on solar. And our numbers show that about 20% of the global solar production will come from India alone. So I just, in fact, 3 days ago, I was in India having the meetings with the energy ministers there. My suggestion is at least India needs to choose the highest efficiency coal-fired power plant, mm-hmm. rather than the inefficient coal-fired power plants, so that their impact on the climate and the local pollution is much lower. But we, in the future, if we want to understand the global energy markets and environment, we have to started to look more and more what is happening in New Delhi.
Okay. So one thing that we don't often talk about when we talk about clean energy is nuclear. And so I'd like to invite Agneta Rising, Director General of the World Nuclear Association, to join us to talk about the future of nuclear. So many projections actually project that that nuclear has to be part of the picture. So first of all, do you guys agree on the numbers, on how much nuclear we need or how much nuclear we'll have?
I do think that we agree on the numbers because we are looking very much to the different scenarios that the IEA is doing. And there is only one scenario they are making on 2 degrees where the world sort of survives and are able to avoid the most disruptive things from climate change. In that scenario, nuclear is playing the largest role of the low-carbon options, and it's 18%. To reach there, nuclear capacity needs to more than double. And today we have 68 reactors under construction, which is the largest number in 25 years. So nuclear is growing and coming to more and more capacity in the coming years, but it's still not enough. But the nuclear industry, which the World Nuclear Association represents, are committed to do more, are ready to deliver more, and to, in the future, to be able to do 25%, and to add 1,000 gigawatts up to 2050. So it's quite a substantial growth. I'd also like to add that already today, nuclear energy is the second largest low-carbon energy source in the world. In Europe, it's 27%, so it's the largest low-carbon energy source in Europe. So it is taken for granted, but governments sort of forget to communicate about it, and it's needed to get support.
Well, but that raises an interesting question, right? I mean, nuclear certainly has a lot to offer. It's stable, it's reliable, it's dispatchable, it's emissions-free. But when it goes wrong, it goes very, very wrong. And so many populations are uncomfortable. Governments are moving away from it. So, one, how do you get around that? But also, both of you, where do you see nuclear actually developing?
Mm-hmm. So nuclear is developing a lot in China. Today it's 25 reactors under construction, and also in India and Russia and Middle East. So nuclear is developing in most of the countries in the world, in fact, but only going backwards in a very few countries, which we talk a lot about. Mm-hmm. We forget to talk about all the good development in the other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. How do you see this?
I mean, we agree on the numbers, but we agree doesn't mean that nuclear will grow. So I think the government should agree, people in the street should agree on that. And there is a lot of homework to be done by the nuclear industry to ensure the society that nuclear is a safe technology. This is number one. Number two, nuclear, when you first build the power plant, it is very expensive to find the first money, the capital, to put it on the table. So therefore, if the governments are serious, they should find the right framework to investors to come there. But in a liberalized markets, free markets, it is rather challenging to find so big money, cash, to put on the table and wait for the returns to come many, many years. Mm-hmm. So this is a serious issue. And China, you mentioned China is very important again here. And what is happening with China is that when we thought 2-3 years ago, nuclear technology, the first countries came to our mind was United States, France, Germany in the past, Japan, Korea. They were the countries who had the nuclear technology and export them to the other countries. And now, China, by building a lot of nuclear power plants, bringing the cost down, which is a major issue, and China will be, you will see, in a few years of time, China will be exporting its nuclear technology to the other countries, and will be competing with some of the countries I mentioned. So China not only builds atom, But building at home, learning by doing, bring the cost down, and they are bring the cost down and will be important player. And the other countries I mentioned, forgetting by not doing, so they are going to keep the price up, and China will have a competitive advantage there.
Okay. So I'd like to actually open it up to the floor, because we're close to the end of our session. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to email them to q@nytimes.com. Do we have questions from the audience?
Well, we've actually had a series of questions that have to do with hydroelectric power in the mix. And they've come in from the Balkan region and from Portugal and from North Wales. And the question is, hydro power plants are now being presented as a climate change solution. And the question is, aren't reservoirs huge producers of methane that is one of the worst greenhouse gases? And then a second question is, why don't we speak about the reduction or more useful or sensible consumption of electricity as the first in the list of measures?
I can take them if you wish. Okay.
Yes.
So let me just say, first of all, hydropower is an extremely important source of generating electricity without emitting carbon emissions. Yes, in some cases there may be some chemical reactions and we may see some methane to come up, but this can be easily addressed. And if the countries have hydropower, they should make the most out of it. And the future of hydropower is in Africa. We have huge hydropower resource in Africa, and it can be a major solution, in my view, one of the biggest challenges of our world today, namely more than 600 million people, 600 billion people have no access to electricity in Africa. 2 out of 3 people in Africa have no access to electricity, and hydropower can well be a solution. Electricity and efficiency, this is definitely a very important issue. I mentioned when the countries make their pledges to reduce the emissions, one is the renewables. The second emphasis was on energy efficiency. It is very important. I mentioned China and other countries are doing. For example, Europe, let me give you one example. In the last 10 years in Europe, the number of electrical appliances we have in Europe has increased more than 4 times. Television sets, refrigerators, computers, etc., increased more than 4 times. But electricity consumption households remain the same because we are using them much more efficiently now. They are consuming less electricity as a result of the Europe's stringent energy efficiency policies.
I believe you had something to add.
Yes, I think it's a very important question about hydropower. Hydropower is, of course, part of the solution. It's something you can have in certain countries, and in some countries it will give off a little bit more methane. And this has to be, of course, taken into account depending on how you do the reservoirs and also how you keep the flow clean. So that's possible to do. And energy efficiency is, of course, extremely important. But I also like to bring in the consumer perspective because, I mean, we are having production. People are using energy because they need to use electricity. And there's still a lot more people in the world who needs a supply of electricity. And I like to bring the discussion into France because France is a country that has used a lot of nuclear energy and having some 64 gigawatts. And by that, they have decarbonized the whole electricity sector. And Germany also want to do the same, but they're using renewables, which are very valuable source as well. And they have installed more than 95 gigawatts of renewables. But the difference is that nuclear energy in France delivers 3 times as much electricity as a much larger capacity of renewables. I think it's important to have it in mind because the consumer pays in the end.
Right. Okay, great. Well, on that note, I'm afraid we are out of time. I'm sorry, I can't take any questions from the floor, but I'm sure you'll be able to speak with them afterwards. So thank you both very much for your time this morning. I'm sorry to cut the session short. Please.